Sarah's too broken to fight back. 20 years in the army destroyed her. She'll just roll over and take whatever I give her." Those were the words my husband Derek whispered to his girlfriend Monica as they stood together at our daughter Emma's high school graduation ceremony, thinking I couldn't hear them over the crowd's applause. For 6 months, I'd suspected something was wrong with our marriage, but I'd attributed Derek's distance to work stress and my own struggles adjusting to civilian life after 2 decades of military service. What I didn't know was that while I'd been building a new career as a defense contractor and trying to be the mother Emma deserved, Derek had been planning the most devastating ambush of my life. And he was about to discover that underestimating a decorated Army intelligence officer was the biggest tactical error he'd ever make. The graduation ceremony was being held at Riverside High School's football stadium on a perfect June evening in 2024. Emma looked radiant in her cap and gown, having earned valedictorian honors with a full scholarship to MIT for computer engineering. I'd been so proud, watching her walk across that stage, knowing that despite all the deployments and missed birthdays during her childhood, she'd grown into an extraordinary young woman. Derek and I sat in the bleachers with hundreds of other families, and for a moment I'd felt something approaching happiness. Our daughter was launching into her bright future, and maybe Derek and I could finally work on rebuilding what the years of military life had strained in our relationship. That illusion shattered when Derek leaned over during the applause for Emma's valedictorian speech and said quietly, "Sarah, we need to talk after this is over. There's something important I need to tell you." The tone was wrong, not excited about Emma's achievements, not warm, but cold and formal. Military training teaches you to read people, to notice micro-expressions and vocal patterns that signal danger. Every instinct I'd developed over 20 years of service was suddenly screaming warnings. But it was what happened during the reception afterward that revealed the true scope of his betrayal. Emma was surrounded by friends and teachers, glowing with accomplishment, when Derek pulled me aside to a quiet corner of the school cafeteria where the celebration was being held. "Sarah, I'm leaving you," he announced with the casual tone someone might use to comment on the weather. "I've filed for divorce. Monica and I are moving to Phoenix together next month. You'll get the papers Monday." The words hit me like an IED blast, sudden, devastating, disorienting. Monica Chen, his real estate partner who'd been coming to family dinners for the past year, who'd helped us find our current house, who'd been Emma's honorary aunt. The woman I'd trusted, welcomed into our home, confided in about my struggles transitioning from military to civilian life. "Tonight?" I managed to say, my voice barely controlled. "You're telling me this at our daughter's graduation?" Derek shrugged with a callousness that took my breath away. "Emma's 18 now. She's an adult. This seemed like the right time for a clean break." He paused, then delivered what he clearly thought was the killing blow. "Besides, you've been so detached since you got out of the army. This marriage has been over for years. I'm just making it official." I looked across the cafeteria and saw Monica standing near the dessert table, wearing a red dress I'd complimented her on just weeks earlier when she'd worn it to Emma's pre-graduation party at our house. She was watching us with an expression I now recognized as anticipation, not concern. This wasn't a sudden decision or an emotional affair that had gotten out of hand. This was a carefully planned operation, executed with military precision at the moment calculated to cause maximum damage. "What about Emma?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. "What about her graduation party tomorrow? Her send-off to MIT?" "She'll understand," Derek said dismissively. "Kids are resilient. And, honestly, Sarah, you've never been the maternal type anyway. All those deployments, all that time choosing the army over your family. Emma barely knows you. She'll be fine with Monica and me." The cruelty was breathtaking. Every sacrifice I'd made during my military career, the missed birthdays, the holidays spent in forward operating bases, the constant worry about whether I'd make it home to see Emma grow up. Derek was weaponizing against me. Every moment I'd spent serving my country, he was twisting into evidence that I was a failure as a mother and wife. But it was the next part of the conversation that revealed how completely he'd underestimated who he was dealing with. As we stood, there in the corner of the cafeteria, surrounded by the sounds of celebration, Derek continued his attack with what he clearly believed was devastating psychological warfare. "I've already talked to a lawyer," he said, his voice taking on a tone of smug satisfaction. "Military divorces are complicated, but Monica found someone who specializes in them. You'll get your pension and maybe half the house equity, but that's about it. The business Monica and I built together, that's separate property. And given your PTSD and depression issues, plus all those years you were absent on deployment, any custody arrangement is going to favor the stable parent who was actually here." PTSD and depression issues. He was referring to the therapy I'd sought after particularly difficult deployments, the counseling that had helped me process what I'd seen and done in service to my country, sessions I'd shared with him in confidence, vulnerabilities I'd trusted him to protect, now being weaponized in a custody battle I didn't even know was coming. "Derek," I said quietly, "you have no idea what you're doing." He laughed, laughed at what he perceived as an empty threat from a broken woman. "Sarah, I know exactly what I'm doing. You're a warrior without a war, a soldier who can't adapt to civilian life. Monica and I have been planning this for months. The paperwork's filed, the lawyers are paid, and Emma's going to understand that she's better off with parents who can actually be present in her life." That's when I heard it. The conversation that would change everything. As Derek continued his psychological assault, apparently confident that he'd delivered a knockout blow, I became aware of voices just behind us. Monica was talking to someone. On her phone, and in the acoustic dead zone of the corner where Derek had chosen to destroy our marriage, her voice carried with perfect clarity. "The transfer went through this morning," Monica was saying to whoever was on the other end of the call. $340,000 from their joint account, just like we planned. She has no idea we've been liquidating everything. By the time she figures out what happened, we'll be in Arizona with new identities and enough money to start over completely." My blood turned to ice. They weren't just planning to divorce me and take Emma. They were planning to steal everything and disappear. The joint account Monica was referring to contained my entire military retirement lump sum payment, the college fund I'd been building for Emma since she was born, and the down payment we'd saved for the house we'd planned to buy after Emma left. For college. Derek was still talking, apparently oblivious to Monica's phone conversation just 10 feet away. "The transition's going to be hard for Emma at first, but once she sees how much happier Monica and I are together, she'll understand. And you'll have time to figure out your life without the responsibility of trying to be someone you're not." But I was no longer listening to Derek's monologue. 20 years of intelligence work had trained me to gather information while appearing passive, to listen to multiple conversations simultaneously, to piece together operational pictures from fragments of overheard communication. And what I was hearing from Monica's phone call was painting a picture of systematic financial fraud that went far beyond simple marital infidelity. "No, the business accounts are clean," Monica continued on her call. "We moved that money months ago. The rental properties are already in the LLC we set up in Nevada. By next week, there won't be anything left in Massachusetts for her to claim." Rental properties. LLC in Nevada. They hadn't just been planning a divorce, they'd been systematically moving assets out of my reach for months. The real estate business that Derek had always claimed was struggling, that he'd said barely broke even most months, had apparently been generating enough income to fund an elaborate escape plan. Derek was wrapping up his announcement, clearly, believing he'd delivered a devastating psychological blow that would leave me too shocked and broken to respond effectively. "The papers will be served Monday morning. I've already moved my things out of the house. They're in storage until Monica and I leave for Phoenix. You can keep the house for now, but without my income, you'll probably have to sell it anyway. I looked at my husband of 15 years, the man I'd married when I was a young sergeant, the father of my brilliant daughter who was across the room accepting congratulations from her teachers and friends. He was looking at me with an expression of cold satisfaction, apparently convinced that he'd just executed the perfect ambush against an enemy who was too damaged and dependent to fight back. What Derek didn't know about his broken wife was that Colonel Sarah Mitchell hadn't just served 20 years in the Army. She'd spent the last decade of that service in military intelligence, specializing in financial crimes and international money laundering. She'd tracked terrorist funding networks across 3 continents, unraveled sophisticated fraud schemes that had financed insurgent operations, and built cases that had dismantled entire criminal organizations. The skills that had made her one of the Army's most effective intelligence officers hadn't disappeared when she'd retired 6 months earlier. They'd simply been dormant, waiting for the right operational environment to emerge. Derek thought he was looking at a victim. He was actually looking at someone who'd just shifted into hunter mode, and his financial crimes investigation was about to begin. Hey, everyone watching. Before we dive deeper into this story, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. If stories about people who thought they could destroy a veteran and got completely demolished interest you, make sure you hit that subscribe button because I've got some incredible cases of military justice coming up this week that will absolutely blow your mind. The reception continued around us as if nothing had happened. Parents mingled with teachers, sharing proud stories about their graduating seniors. Emma was still surrounded by friends, her face glowing with excitement about her MIT scholarship and the future stretching ahead of her. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal against the backdrop of Derek's devastating announcement and Monica's incriminating phone conversation. I forced myself to maintain the appearance of calm while my mind shifted into operational mode. 20 years of military training had taught me that the first rule of surviving an ambush was to avoid revealing that you understood the true scope of the attack. Derek and Monica believed they held all the advantages. Surprise, superior. Planning and a target they assumed was too psychologically damaged to mount an effective counteroffensive. I need to process this, I told Derek, keeping my voice carefully modulated to sound shocked and defeated rather than analytical and strategic. I never saw this coming. Derek's expression softened slightly, apparently interpreting my controlled response as the beginning of emotional collapse. Sarah, I know this is hard to hear, especially tonight. But honestly, we've both been unhappy for years. This is better for everyone, including Emma. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. I nodded slowly, as if trying to absorb information that was too overwhelming to fully comprehend. When did you say the papers would be served? Monday morning. My lawyer said it would be better to wait until after graduation, so we didn't disrupt Emma's big day. The irony was apparently lost on him that announcing a divorce at the graduation reception was somehow less disruptive than serving papers beforehand. And you've already moved your things out? This morning, while you were at the salon getting ready for tonight, Monica helped me pack. Most of it's in a storage unit, but some of the important stuff is already at her place. Important stuff. I filed that information away for later analysis. In intelligence work, seemingly casual remarks often contained critical intelligence about operational timelines and resource allocation. I should probably tell Emma, I said, glancing toward our daughter who was now posing for photos with her best friend Madison. Let's wait, Derek said quickly. Let her enjoy tonight. We can sit down with her tomorrow and explain everything calmly. Another tactical error on his part. Derek was giving me 18 hours to prepare before Emma learned about the divorce. In military terms, that was enough time to conduct reconnaissance, develop a strategy, and begin implementing countermeasures. Okay, I agreed. Tomorrow. Monica had finished her phone call and was walking toward us, her expression carefully arranged into something that might pass for sympathetic concern if you didn't know she'd just been discussing the theft of my life savings. How's everything going? she asked, her voice pitched at exactly the right level of gentle inquiry. Sarah, you look a little pale. Are you feeling all right? The performance was flawless. Concerned family friend checking on the welfare of someone who might be having a difficult moment. If I hadn't overheard her phone conversation, I might have appreciated the skill involved in her deception. Derek just told me about your plans, I said, watching her face carefully for micro-expressions that might reveal her true emotional state. Monica's eyes flickered briefly to Derek before returning to me with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. Sarah, I want you to know how sorry I am about the timing. We never wanted you to find out this way, especially not tonight. The apology was perfectly calibrated, acknowledging the situation while implying that the primary regret was about timing rather than substance. It was exactly the kind of manipulation technique that would work on someone who was genuinely unprepared for this revelation. These things happen, I replied, maintaining the tone of someone struggling to process unexpected information. I guess I should have seen the signs. Don't blame yourself, Monica said, reaching out to touch my arm in a gesture of comfort that made my skin crawl. Sometimes relationships just run their course. The important thing is that everyone moves forward in a healthy way. Derek nodded approvingly at Monica's diplomatic response. They were working as a team, presenting a united front of reasonable adults making difficult but necessary decisions. The choreography suggested they'd rehearsed this conversation multiple times. I think I need some air, I said. This is a lot to take in. Of course, Derek said. Take all the time you need. Monica and I will keep an eye on Emma. I walked toward the exit, moving slowly as if overwhelmed by emotion rather than rapidly as if executing a tactical withdrawal. Once outside the cafeteria, I found a quiet spot in the school parking lot and pulled out my phone. The first call I made was to my sister Jennifer in Colorado. Jenny was a civilian, a high school math teacher who'd never served in the military, but she was also the most level-headed person I knew, and someone I could trust completely. Sarah? How was graduation? How's Emma? Jenny, I need you to listen carefully and not ask questions until I'm finished, I said, keeping my voice low and controlled. Derek just announced he's divorcing me. Tonight at the reception. He and Monica have been planning this for months, and I have reason to believe they've been systematically stealing money from our joint accounts. There was a pause before Jenny responded. What do you need me to do? This was why I'd called Jenny first. No dramatics, no emotional reactions, just immediate readiness to provide support. I need you to call your bank tomorrow morning and ask about setting up a secure account. That can't be accessed by anyone except me. I may need to move money quickly. Done. What else? I'm going to send you some documents and information over the next few days. Keep copies of everything in case something happens to my files. Sarah, are you safe? Do you need me to come out? There? I'm safe for now. But Jenny, I think this is bigger than just a divorce. I think they've been running a long-term financial fraud operation, and I may not be their only victim. Jesus. Okay, what can I do? Just be ready. I may need you to verify information or provide witness testimony later. And Jenny, don't mention this conversation to anyone, not even Mom. Understood. Sarah, be careful. And remember, you're not the same person you were when you married Derek. You're stronger now. The second call was more complicated. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Lieutenant Colonel James Rodriguez, my former commanding officer who'd retired 6 months before me, and now worked for a private security firm specializing in financial investigations. Sarah, how's civilian life treating you? Jim, I need your professional advice. Hypothetically, if someone was systematically moving assets out of joint accounts in preparation for a divorce, what would be the best way to track those movements? There was a pause. This isn't hypothetical, is it? No. How much time do you have? Papers are being served Monday morning, but I think they're planning to disappear completely after that. Sarah, this is outside my area of expertise, but I know. Someone who specializes in exactly this kind of situation. Rachel Chen. She's a forensic accountant who works with divorce attorneys on complex asset cases. Former Navy intelligence. I can have her call you tonight if you want. Yes. And Jim? This needs to stay completely confidential. Understood. Sarah, are you okay? Do you need immediate help? I'm operational, but thank you. I'll have Rachel call you within the hour. And Sarah? These people have no idea who they're fucking with. After ending the call, I sat in my car for a few minutes, organizing my thoughts and developing preliminary operational priorities. 20 years of military service had taught me that successful operations required clear objectives, accurate intelligence, and careful resource management. My primary objective was protecting Emma's future. Her college fund, her stability, her relationship with both parents needed to be preserved despite Derek and Monica's criminal conspiracy. My secondary objective was recovering stolen assets and ensuring Derek and Monica faced appropriate consequences for their crimes. My tertiary objective was documenting their methods to prevent other families from being victimized by similar schemes. The intelligence picture was still incomplete, but several facts were already clear. Derek and Monica had been planning this operation for months. They'd systematically moved assets out of accounts I could access. They'd established business entities in other states specifically to hide money. They'd coordinated with legal and financial professionals to optimize their chances of success. But they'd also made critical tactical errors. They'd underestimated my capabilities and resilience. They'd chosen to execute their plan at a high-profile public event where their behavior could be witnessed and documented. Most importantly, they'd allowed me to overhear operational details that revealed the true scope of their criminal enterprise. As I sat in the parking lot, watching other families celebrate their children's achievements, I felt something I hadn't experienced since leaving the Army. I felt like I had a mission again. Derek and Monica thought they were stealing from a broken veteran who lacked the skills and resources to fight back. They were about to discover that they'd just declared war on someone who'd spent 2 decades learning how to win battles against enemies who thought they held all the advantages. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Mom, where are you? They're about to announce the scholarship recipients, and I want you there for pictures. I typed back quickly. On my way, sweetheart. So proud of you. As I walked back toward the school, I realized that Derek's timing might have been strategically perfect from his perspective, but it was also tactically disastrous. He'd chosen to ambush me at the moment when I was most emotionally invested in protecting Emma's future. He'd given me the strongest possible motivation to fight back with everything I had. The broken veteran he thought he was destroying was about to become his worst nightmare. The rest of the graduation reception passed, in a carefully orchestrated performance that would have made my old intelligence unit proud. I returned to the cafeteria with the practiced smile of someone maintaining operational security, congratulating Emma on her achievements while internally cataloging every interaction between Derek and Monica for future analysis. Emma was radiant, surrounded by teachers praising her academic accomplishments and friends excited about their various college plans. She kept pulling me into conversations, introducing me as my mom, the retired Army colonel who's going to help me survive MIT's engineering program. The pride in her voice was unmistakable, and it strengthened my resolve to ensure that Derek and Monica's criminal conspiracy wouldn't destroy her future. Mom, you should tell Professor Williams about your logistics work overseas, Emma said, introducing me to her advanced physics teacher. She managed supply chains across entire combat zones. Actually, Emma, your mother's experience would be fascinating to discuss, Professor Williams said. Military logistics requires the kind of systematic thinking that translates perfectly to engineering applications. I found myself engaged in a conversation about resource management and problem-solving methodologies while simultaneously observing Derek and Monica across the room. They were working the crowd like a political campaign, Derek playing the proud father while Monica charmed other parents with her real estate expertise. To anyone watching casually, they appeared to be a happy blended family celebrating Emma's achievements, but my trained eye caught details that revealed the operational nature of their evening. Monica was taking photos constantly, but not random, celebration shots. She was systematically documenting the other families present, focusing particularly on parents wearing expensive jewelry or discussing their children's college funding strategies. Derek was collecting business cards and contact information with unusual intensity for a graduation reception. They weren't just celebrating Emma's graduation, they were hunting for their next victims. The realization hit me like a tactical briefing, slide clicking into place. Derek and Monica weren't simply planning to steal from me and disappear. They were using this event to identify other wealthy families with college-bound children, families who might be vulnerable to the same real estate and financial planning schemes they'd used on me. Mrs. Davidson was just telling me about their summer home in the Hamptons, I overheard Monica saying to another parent. It sounds like such a wonderful investment property. You know, Derek and I have been helping families with vacation rental strategies. Mrs. Davidson. Emma had mentioned her, Chloe Davidson's mother, whose daughter had also received a full scholarship to an Ivy League school. A military widow whose husband had died in a training accident 3 years earlier, leaving her with substantial life insurance and survivor benefits. Monica was already identifying her next target. 20 minutes before the reception officially ended, my phone rang with the call I'd been expecting. The caller ID showed a Colorado number. "Excuse me," I told Emma. "I need to take this call from Aunt Jenny." I stepped outside into the parking lot again, but this time I wasn't alone. A woman about my age was leaning against a black sedan, clearly waiting for me. "Colonel Mitchell?" she said as I approached. "I'm Rachel Chen. Jim Rodriguez asked me to drive up from Boston tonight instead of calling. We need to talk immediately." Rachel Chen was compact and efficient, with the bearing of someone accustomed to dealing with complex problems under time pressure. She wore dark jeans and a blazer that suggested professionalism without calling attention to herself. "What did Jim tell you?" I asked. "That you've stumbled onto what might be a sophisticated financial fraud operation disguised as a divorce proceeding. Is that accurate?" "More than accurate. I have reason to believe my husband and his business partner have been systematically stealing from me for months, and tonight I overheard them discussing asset transfers and new identities." Rachel pulled out a tablet and opened what appeared to be a digital forensic workspace. "I need you to walk me through everything you know, starting with timeline and moving to financial details." For the next 15 minutes, I briefed Rachel with the same systematic approach I'd used for intelligence debriefings. Timeline of suspicious behavior, specific overheard conversations, known financial accounts and business entities, estimated dollar amounts, and observed behavioral patterns. Rachel took notes rapidly, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated deep expertise in financial crime investigation. "The rental properties in Nevada are interesting," she said when I finished. "That suggests long-term planning and sophisticated asset protection strategies. This isn't opportunistic theft, this is organized financial crime. How long would it take to set up that kind of infrastructure?" "Minimum 6 months of careful planning, probably longer." Rachel looked up from her tablet. "Colonel, I think your husband has been planning this since before you retired from the Army." The implication was staggering. Derek hadn't decided to leave me after I'd struggled with civilian transition. He'd been planning to steal from me while I was still on active duty, probably calculating that my final military retirement payment would provide the funding for his escape plan. "What can we do legally?" I asked. "Monday morning, I file emergency motions to freeze all accounts and assets pending investigation. But tonight, we need to gather as much evidence as possible before they realize you're onto them." Rachel handed me a small device that looked like a standard smartphone. "This is a digital recorder with encryption capabilities. If you can get them talking about their plans again, we need documentation." "And if they've already moved the money offshore?" Then we trace it and recover it. International asset recovery is complicated, but it's not impossible, especially when we can prove criminal intent. Rachel's expression was grimly satisfied. Your husband made a tactical error choosing to steal from someone with your background and connections. As we spoke, families began streaming out of the school, the reception officially ending. I could see Derek and Monica walking toward the parking lot with Emma between them, all three appearing to be engaged in animated conversation. I need to go, I told Rachel. They're expecting me to ride home with them. Colonel, be very careful tonight. If they suspect you know about their operation, they might accelerate their timeline. Understood. How do I contact you? Rachel handed me a business card with multiple phone numbers, anytime, day or night. And Colonel, don't let them isolate you from Emma tonight. Stay visible, stay public. I walked back toward my family, noting how natural Derek and Monica looked together while I approached from a distance. They weren't pretending to be co-conspirators. They were genuinely comfortable with each other in a way that suggested their relationship had been developing for much longer than the few months Derek had implied. There you are, Emma called out as I reached them. Monica was just telling me about this amazing restaurant in Phoenix that she wants to take us to when we visit. As if the three of us would be traveling to Arizona together for happy family vacations. Monica's ability to maintain her deception even with Emma was impressively sociopathic. That sounds wonderful, I said, maintaining my performance of someone still processing shocking news rather than someone developing a counter-operational strategy. How are you holding up, Sarah? Derek asked, his voice carrying what sounded like genuine concern. I know tonight was a lot to process. I'm okay, just trying to understand how we got here. Sometimes these things happen gradually, Monica said, her tone perfectly calibrated for supportive family friend. The important thing is that everyone focuses on what's best for Emma. Emma looked confused, but not alarmed. What are you guys talking about? What's best for me? Derek and Monica exchanged glances that I now recognized as tactical communication between co-conspirators. We'll talk about it tomorrow, sweetheart, Derek said. Tonight is about celebrating your achievements. As we walked toward Derek's car, I noticed Monica checking her phone constantly, responding to texts with quick, efficient messages. Operational communications, most likely. Updates to whoever was coordinating the financial aspects of their escape plan. Actually, I said as we reached the parking lot, I think I'll drive myself home. I need some time to think. Are you sure? Derek asked. You seem pretty shaken up. Maybe you shouldn't be driving. His concern was perfectly performed, but I caught the quick look he exchanged with Monica. They wanted me in Derek's car, where they could control the conversation and monitor my emotional state. I'm fine, I insisted. Emma, do you want to ride with me? I'll go with Dad and Monica, Emma said. We were discussing some ideas for my send-off party tomorrow. Send-off party. Another element of their deception. They were planning a celebration for Emma's departure to college, knowing they intended to disappear before she actually left for MIT. Okay, I'll see you at home. As I drove back to our house in Lincoln, following Derek's car through the familiar streets of our neighborhood, I used the hands-free system to call Rachel Chen again. They're planning a party for Emma tomorrow, I reported. Some kind of send-off celebration before she leaves for college. That's perfect cover for a final asset strip, Rachel said immediately. They can clean out everything during the party, making it look like normal preparation for your daughter's departure. How much time do we have? Realistically? Tomorrow? Night might be their extraction point. If they're planning to disappear, they'll want to do it when Emma's distracted and you're emotionally vulnerable. I pulled into our driveway, watching Derek's car arrive 30 seconds behind me. Our house looked exactly the same as it had when I'd left for Emma's graduation 6 hours earlier. But I was now seeing it through the lens of operational analysis. Rather than domestic familiarity, the house Derek claimed he could no longer afford to maintain. the house that contained 20 years of my military memorabilia, Emma's childhood belongings, and family photographs spanning our entire marriage. They were planning to make me choose between fighting for financial assets and preserving sentimental items that couldn't be replaced. As Emma bounded toward the front door, excited to call her MIT roommate with updates from graduation, Derek approached me with an expression of concerned husband trying to help his wife process difficult news. "Sarah, I know this is hard. If you want to talk more tonight, after Emma goes to bed." "I think I need to process everything first," I said. "Maybe we can discuss details tomorrow." Derek nodded approvingly. "That's probably wise. Big decisions shouldn't be made when emotions are running high." As I watched him unlock the front door to the house we'd shared for 8 years, I realized that tomorrow would indeed involve big decisions. Derek and Monica thought they were giving me time to absorb the shock of their announcement. Instead, they were giving me 18 hours to marshal every resource I'd developed over 20 years of military service and turn their perfectly planned operation into their complete destruction. The broken veteran they thought they were abandoning was about to remind them why underestimating a decorated intelligence officer was the kind of mistake that ended careers and destroyed lives. The house felt different as I walked through the front door, like returning to a forward operating base, after learning it had been compromised by enemy infiltration. Every familiar object, the family photos lining the hallway, the military commendations displayed in my study, Emma's artwork from elementary school still hanging on the refrigerator, now carried the weight of knowing they were part of a crime scene rather than a home. Emma headed straight to her room to video call her MIT roommate, her excitement about graduation and college plans creating a bubble of normalcy that felt surreal against the backdrop of what I'd discovered. Derek and Monica lingered in the kitchen, their body language suggesting they were having a quiet conversation while maintaining the pretense of casual interaction. I excused myself to change out of my graduation outfit, but instead of going to my bedroom, I went to my home office, the small study where I'd been managing our family finances and developing my post-military career. If Derek and Monica had been systematically stealing from our accounts, there would be evidence in the financial records I'd been meticulously maintaining since my retirement. 20 years of military service had taught me that successful operations depended on accurate intelligence, and I needed to understand the full scope of what they'd stolen before I could develop an effective counterattack. I opened my laptop and began systematically reviewing 6 months of bank statements, investment, account summaries, and credit card records. What I found was worse than I'd initially suspected. The pattern of theft hadn't begun recently. It had been occurring gradually for over a year, carefully disguised as legitimate expenses and business transactions. Small amounts at first, amounts that wouldn't trigger automatic alerts or raise questions during casual account reviews. But over 12 months, those small amounts had accumulated into systematic theft totaling over $400,000. My military retirement lump sum payment of $180,000 had been transferred to a joint investment account that Derek had claimed would earn higher returns than traditional savings. That account now showed a balance of $23,000 with monthly management fees that I now realized had been transfers to offshore accounts controlled by Derek and Monica. Emma's college fund, built through 15 years of automatic deposits from my military pay, had been reduced from $95,000 to $31,000 through what Derek had described as necessary adjustments to accommodate market volatility. The missing funds had been moved to investment vehicles that existed only on paper, shell companies designed to facilitate money laundering. Our house down payment fund, accumulated over 8 years of dual military and civilian income, had been almost entirely depleted through a series of emergency business expenses related to Derek's real estate ventures with Monica. Of the $120,000 we'd saved, only $18,000 remained. But the most devastating discovery was in our joint checking account activity. Over the past 6 months, Derek had been making regular transfers to cover business operational costs, Money that had funded his and Monica's lifestyle while they planned my financial destruction. Expensive dinners, weekend trips, hotel, stays, and purchases that I now recognized as preparation for their new life together in Arizona. They hadn't just been stealing my money. They'd been using it to finance their affair and fund their escape plan. As I documented each fraudulent transaction, I heard Derek and Monica's voices from the kitchen, their conversation becoming more animated. I activated the recording device Rachel had given me and moved closer to hear their discussion. "The Peterson account cleared this afternoon," Monica was saying. "That's another $85,000 transferred to the Nevada LLC. With Sarah's retirement money and the house equity loan, we're at almost $600,000 total. House equity loan. My blood ran cold. They'd borrowed against our house without my knowledge or consent, using forged documents to access the equity Derek and I had built over 8 years of mortgage payments." "Perfect," Derek replied. "The Phoenix house closes Monday, and the wire transfers to the Cayman accounts are scheduled for Tuesday morning. By Wednesday, we'll be completely clean. Phoenix house, Cayman accounts. This wasn't just theft. It was an elaborate international money laundering operation that had been months in the making. They'd been purchasing real estate in Arizona with stolen money, establishing offshore banking relationships, and creating false identities for permanent disappearance. "What about Emma?" Monica asked. "She's going to ask questions when you don't come back from the supposed business trip." "Emma will be fine," Derek said dismissively. "She'll be at MIT, focused on her studies. By the time she realizes what happened, we'll be established in our new life. Kids are resilient." The casual way he discussed abandoning our daughter was perhaps more painful than the financial theft. Emma wasn't just collateral damage in their scheme. She was an obstacle to be managed and discarded. "Sarah's more of a concern," Monica continued. "She seemed surprisingly calm tonight. I expected more emotional breakdown." "Sarah's always been stoic," Derek replied. "Military training. She'll internalize everything and probably blame herself for not seeing the signs. By the time she processes what's really happening, we'll be beyond her reach." Military training. The irony was staggering. Derek was attributing my controlled response to general military discipline, completely unaware that my specific military training had been in intelligence analysis and financial crime investigation. He thought my stoicism indicated emotional suppression. In reality, it indicated operational planning. "The lawyer said the divorce papers are designed to keep her tied up in legal proceedings for months," Monica added. "Even if she tries to fight the asset division, we'll have moved everything offshore by then." Their attorney was complicit in the fraud, knowingly participating in a scheme designed to delay legal remedies until stolen assets could be moved beyond recovery. This wasn't just marriage dissolution. It was organized crime involving multiple co-conspirators. I continued recording while they discussed operational details that would provide crucial evidence for the federal case I was building. Their confidence was creating tactical vulnerabilities, causing them to discuss sensitive information without proper operational security. "The storage unit has everything ready for shipping," Derek said. "Once we get to Phoenix, we'll have the furniture and personal items sent to the new address. Sarah can keep all the military stuff and photos. We don't need that baggage. Military stuff and photos." 20 years of service memorabilia, family history, and Emma's childhood memories were baggage to be discarded. They were stealing not just money, but irreplaceable elements of our family identity. My phone buzzed with a text message from Rachel Chen. "Emergency injunction filed. Need evidence photos of any documents you can access tonight. Financial records, business papers, anything showing asset transfers." I photographed every relevant document I could find, including Derek's business files that he'd apparently forgotten, were stored in our shared home office. Partnership agreements with Monica, incorporation documents for shell companies, and correspondence with offshore banking institutions provided a comprehensive picture of their criminal enterprise. But the most damaging evidence was Derek's personal computer, which he'd left logged in after our return from graduation. His email account contained months of correspondence detailing their operation, including communications with other conspirators I hadn't previously identified. Their network included a corrupt attorney specializing in divorce fraud, an accountant who created false business entities, and a banker in the Cayman Islands who facilitated money laundering for American clients seeking to hide assets from legal authorities. They weren't just stealing from me. They were part of a professional criminal organization that targeted military families and other vulnerable populations for systematic financial exploitation. One email exchange from 2 months earlier revealed the true scope of their operation. "The Mitchell account is our biggest score yet," Monica had written. To someone named David Kellerman, "Military retirement plus house equity plus college savings gives us almost $600K total. Derek's inside access makes this perfect." Kellerman's response was chilling. "Excellent work. Have you identified the next target?" Military widows and recently divorced veterans are ideal marks. They're financially vulnerable and emotionally isolated. They were running a systematic scheme targeting military families, using Derek's access to inside information about my financial situation as a template for future operations. I was just their current victim in an ongoing pattern of crimes against people who'd served their country. As I continued documenting their communications, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Derek was coming to check on me, probably to assess my emotional state and ensure I wasn't taking any actions that might threaten their operation. I quickly closed his computer and returned to my own financial records, arranging the papers to suggest I was struggling to understand complex transactions rather than conducting systematic evidence gathering. "Sarah." Derek knocked softly on the office door. "How are you doing? I know tonight was overwhelming." I looked up with what I hoped appeared to be confused vulnerability rather than focused determination. "I'm trying to understand our financial situation. Some of these investment statements don't make sense to me." Derek entered the office and sat beside me, his expression showing what appeared to be genuine concern. The performance was flawless. Caring husband helping his overwhelmed wife navigate complex financial documents. "Don't worry about the details tonight," he said gently. "These investment structures are complicated. Monica and I can walk you through everything tomorrow when you're feeling more settled." Monica and I. They were positioning themselves as helpful advisors rather than criminal conspirators, maintaining their deception even during private conversations. "I just want to make sure Emma's college fund is protected," I said, testing their reaction to my primary concern. "Of course," Derek replied smoothly. "Emma's education is our top priority. The fund is invested in secure instruments that will continue growing while she's at MIT." The lie was delivered with such casual confidence that I almost admired his skill. Derek was looking directly at records showing that Emma's college fund had been systematically depleted, while assuring me that her financial future was secure. As Derek left me alone in the office, apparently satisfied that I was struggling with confusion rather than building a criminal case against him, I realized that their greatest tactical advantage was also their greatest vulnerability. They were so confident in their superior planning and my supposed helplessness that they were maintaining normal behavioral patterns rather than implementing enhanced operational security. Derek was leaving incriminating evidence accessible. Monica was discussing operational details on unsecured phones, and both were treating me as a managed asset rather than a potential threat. Tomorrow's send-off party for Emma would provide them with perfect cover for their final asset transfers and departure preparations. They believed they'd successfully positioned me as an emotional victim focused on my daughter's celebration, rather than a military intelligence officer gathering evidence for their complete destruction. By the time they realized their mistake, it would be far too late to prevent the consequences of underestimating Colonel Sarah Mitchell. The next morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Emma was up early, excited about her send-off party and making lists of friends to invite. Derek moved through our kitchen with the comfortable familiarity of someone who belonged there, preparing coffee and discussing party logistics with Monica, who had apparently spent the night in our guest room. To any observer, we looked like a blended family working together to celebrate Emma's transition to college. But my investigation had continued through the night, and what I'd discovered had transformed my understanding of Derek and Monica's operation, from sophisticated theft to something approaching organized crime. While they slept peacefully in my house, confident in their successful deception, I'd been systematically unraveling a criminal network that extended far beyond my own family. Using military intelligence techniques I'd developed over 2 decades of service, I'd traced their financial activities across multiple jurisdictions and identified patterns that revealed the true scope of their crimes. Derek and Monica weren't just stealing from me. They were operating a systematic fraud scheme that had targeted military families across New England for the past 3 years. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showed transactions totaling over $2.3 million stolen from families similar to ours, recently retired service members, military widows, and veterans struggling with civilian transition. Each case followed an identical pattern: emotional manipulation, gradual asset transfer, and systematic isolation of victims from their support networks. Mrs. Eleanor Voss, the widow from Springfield whose husband had died in a training accident, had lost $340,000 in retirement savings. Captain James Morrison, recently retired from the Air Force, had been defrauded of his entire disability settlement. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, struggling with PTSD after 3 combat deployments, had lost her house down payment and her daughter's college fund. 12 families destroyed by Derek and Monica's criminal enterprise, with carefully documented evidence showing premeditation, sophisticated planning, and callous disregard for the service and sacrifice of their victims. But they'd made critical tactical errors that would enable their complete destruction. First, they'd underestimated the intelligence capabilities of their primary target. Derek had chosen to steal from someone whose military specialty was exactly the kind of financial crime investigation needed to unravel their operation. Second, they'd maintained electronic communications that documented every aspect of their criminal conspiracy. Email records, text messages, and financial transactions provided a comprehensive trail of evidence that would satisfy federal prosecutors' requirements for conspiracy charges. Third, they'd involved multiple co-conspirators, who could be turned into witnesses through prosecutorial pressure. Their corrupt attorney, their money laundering banker, and their shell company accountant were all vulnerable to federal charges and likely to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences. Most importantly, they'd chosen to execute their escape plan during a high-profile family celebration that would provide perfect cover for law enforcement operations. Emma's send-off party would become the setting for their arrests. At 8:30 a.m., my phone rang with the call I'd been expecting. Rachel Chen was coordinating with federal authorities to ensure that Derek and Monica's capture would result in maximum asset recovery for all victims. Colonel Mitchell, we've got federal warrants for Derek and Monica's arrest, plus seizure orders, for all identified assets. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit is coordinating with international authorities to freeze offshore accounts and prevent any final transfers. What's the timeline? We execute at 3 p.m. during your daughter's party. That gives us maximum attendance for witness statements and ensures they can't claim they were fleeing due to law enforcement pressure rather than executing a premeditated escape plan. The irony was perfect. Derek and Monica had chosen Emma's celebration as cover for their final asset stripping and departure preparations. Instead, it would become the moment when their entire criminal enterprise collapsed under federal investigation. What do you need from me? Continue normal behavior until 3 p.m. Keep them confident and relaxed. The more natural they act during the party, the stronger our evidence of premeditation becomes. Understood. What about Emma? She'll be protected throughout the operation. Agent Sarah Martinez will be at the party disguised as a parent, and we'll coordinate arrests to minimize trauma for your daughter. As I ended the call, Derek appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed and apparently ready to begin final preparations for Emma's party. "Morning, Sarah. How did you sleep?" "Better than expected," I replied truthfully. I'd slept very well, knowing that justice was finally coming for Derek and Monica's victims. Good. I was worried you might have trouble processing everything from last night. Derek's concern was perfectly performed, but I now recognized it as operational assessment rather than genuine care. He was monitoring my emotional state to ensure I remained manageable throughout their final day of operations. "I think I'm still in shock," I said, maintaining the performance of confused vulnerability. "It's hard to believe our marriage is really ending. I know this is difficult, but I think you'll find that some separation might actually be healthy for both of us," Derek replied, his voice carrying the tone of reasonable adult making difficult but necessary decisions. Monica emerged from the guest room looking refreshed and ready for what she believed would be her final day in Massachusetts before beginning a new life in Arizona, funded by stolen money. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind that I stayed over," she said with perfectly calibrated, apologetic concern. "Derek was worried about leaving you alone after such a difficult evening." The manipulation was so smooth that I almost admired the professional quality of their deception. They were positioning Monica's presence as concern for my welfare rather than operational coordination between co-conspirators preparing for criminal escape. "It's fine," I said. "Actually, having you here might help Emma understand that this isn't about anger or conflict between Derek and me." "Exactly," Derek agreed. "We want Emma to see that adults can handle difficult transitions with maturity and respect." Emma bounded downstairs, her energy infectious as she discussed party plans and college preparation. Her excitement provided perfect emotional cover for the final phases of my counter-operation. "Mom, can we set up the photo display in the living room? I want to show everyone pictures from elementary school through graduation." "Of course, sweetheart. Do you want help gathering the albums?" As Emma and I worked together arranging family photographs, Derek and Monica moved through the house with systematic efficiency that I now recognized as operational rather than domestic. They were cataloging valuable items, identifying documents that needed to be secured or destroyed, and preparing for rapid departure. But they were also creating additional evidence of their criminal intent. Every item they examined, every document they handled, every conversation they had was being recorded by surveillance equipment that Rachel Chen's team had installed during the early morning hours. At 11 a.m., guests began arriving for Emma's party. Friends from high school, teachers who'd mentored her, neighbors who'd watched her grow up, and extended family members who wanted to celebrate her achievements before she left for MIT. Derek and Monica worked the crowd with practiced charm. Derek, playing the proud father while Monica showcased her real estate expertise in conversations with other parents. But I was now observing their interactions through the lens of criminal investigation rather than social celebration. Monica was systematically gathering information about other families' financial situations, college funding strategies, and family dynamics that indicated vulnerability to future fraud schemes. Derek was collecting contact information and building relationships that could provide access to new targets. They weren't just celebrating Emma's achievements, they were conducting reconnaissance for future criminal operations. Mrs. Henderson, whose daughter was also attending MIT, mentioned her concerns about funding 4 years of private university education on a teacher's salary. Monica immediately engaged her in conversation about investment strategies and financial planning services. Colonel James Morrison, recently retired from the Air Force and struggling with PTSD-related employment challenges, discussed his difficulties accessing disability benefits. Derek expressed sympathy and offered to connect him with specialists who understood military benefit systems. They were identifying and grooming their next victims at my daughter's graduation party. At 1:30 p.m., I received a text message from Agent Martinez. "In position. All units ready. Continue normal activities." Looking around our backyard, filled with people celebrating Emma's bright future, I realized that Derek and Monica's operation had been even more sophisticated than I'd initially understood. They weren't just thieves. They were predators who used social gatherings to identify vulnerable families and build the trust relationships necessary for long-term financial exploitation. Emma was opening gifts and laughing with friends, completely unaware that her celebration was about to become a federal crime scene. Derek and Monica were making final preparations for their escape, confident that their careful planning had ensured success. In 30 minutes, their perfect crime would become their complete destruction, orchestrated by the broken veteran they'd so catastrophically underestimated. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and justice was finally coming for all their victims. At exactly 2:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the federal operation was scheduled to begin, Derek pulled me aside. With an expression of concerned urgency that I now recognized as tactical misdirection rather than genuine emotion. "Sarah, there's something else we need to discuss," he said, guiding me toward the quiet corner of our backyard where Emma's childhood swing set stood as a reminder of happier times. "I didn't want to overwhelm you last night, but there are some financial complications we need to address immediately." Monica appeared beside us as if summoned, her timing too perfect to be coincidental. They were implementing their final phase, the moment when they would extract whatever remaining assets they could access while maintaining the pretense of helpful guidance. "What kind of complications?" I asked, maintaining my performance of confused. "Dependency." Derek pulled out a folder of documents that looked official and intimidating. "The investment accounts we discussed last night have some tax implications that need immediate attention. If we don't file certain paperwork by Monday morning, you could face significant IRS penalties." The documents were impressively professional forgeries designed to pressure me into signing authorizations that would give them access to accounts they hadn't yet been able to reach. My military retirement account, managed through federal systems, with enhanced security protocols, had apparently proven more difficult to penetrate than they'd anticipated. "These forms authorize Monica and me to handle the tax filings as your financial representatives," Derek continued. "It's temporary, just until the complications are resolved, but we need your signature today to meet the federal deadlines." Monica nodded with perfectly calibrated sympathy. "Sarah, I know this is a lot to process, especially today when you're focused on Emma's celebration, but tax deadlines don't wait for personal circumstances." I looked at the documents, recognizing them as sophisticated attempts to gain legal access to my federal retirement benefits and survivor benefits that Derek couldn't reach through normal fraud channels. If I signed these authorizations, they would have legitimate access to over $200,000 in protected military benefits. "I'm not sure I understand all these legal terms," I said, stalling for time while observing their body language for signs of operational urgency. "Don't worry about the technical details," Derek said smoothly. "Monica's real estate law background makes her perfect for handling complex financial paperwork. You just need to sign and date where we've marked." They were pressuring me to sign documents without reading them, using time constraints and legal complexity to override my natural caution. It was a textbook high-pressure fraud technique, perfected through practice on their previous victims. As I pretended to study the paperwork, I noticed Monica checking her phone with increasing frequency. Text messages were arriving every few minutes, and her responses were becoming more terse and urgent. "Is everything okay?" I asked, indicating her phone. "Just coordinating some business details for Monday," Monica replied, but her smile seemed forced. "Real estate transactions require constant communication." Derek shot her a look that suggested her phone activity was violating their operational security protocols. They were receiving updates about something that was making them nervous, but they needed my signature before they could respond to whatever was developing. At 2:52 p.m., Monica's phone buzzed with what appeared to be an urgent call. She looked at the screen, and I saw her face pale slightly before she declined the call. "Monica, take your call if you need to," I said. "These documents can wait a few minutes." "No, it's fine," she replied quickly. "This is more important." But Derek was studying Monica's expression with obvious concern. Something was wrong with their timeline, and they were running out of time to complete their final asset extraction. "Sarah, we really need to get this paperwork filed today," Derek pressed. "The penalties for missing federal tax deadlines can be severe, especially for military retirement accounts." I looked up from the documents, meeting Derek's eyes with what I hoped appeared to be grateful dependency rather than strategic analysis. "Derek, I appreciate you handling all these complicated financial details. You've always been so much better with numbers and legal paperwork than I am." His expression softened, apparently interpreting my response as submission to his superior expertise. "I know this is overwhelming, especially after last night's announcement. But Monica and I will take care of everything. You just focus on Emma and your own emotional recovery." As I reached for the pen Derek offered, my military training kicked in with a sudden recognition of the tactical situation. Monica's phone calls, Derek's urgency about signatures, and their positioning near our back gate rather than the main party area suggested they were preparing for rapid departure. They weren't just executing final asset theft. They were implementing emergency escape protocols. At 2:55 p.m., 5 minutes before the federal operation was scheduled to begin, I made a decision that would determine whether Derek and Monica's criminal enterprise succeeded or failed completely. "Actually," I said, setting down the pen without signing, "I think I should have my own attorney review these documents before I authorize anyone to represent me with federal agencies." Derek's expression shifted from patient encouragement to barely controlled frustration. "Sarah, there isn't time for attorney reviews. The deadline is Monday morning." "Then we'll face whatever penalties come from missing the deadline," I replied, firmly. 20 years of military service taught me never to sign documents I don't fully understand, especially documents involving federal agencies. Monica and Derek exchanged a look that confirmed my suspicion. They were operating under time pressure that didn't allow for delays or complications. "Sarah, you're being unnecessarily cautious about routine paperwork," Monica said, her voice carrying an edge of irritation that she quickly suppressed. "We're trying to protect your financial interests." At exactly 3:00 p.m., as Derek opened his mouth to increase pressure for my signature, Emma's laughter rang out from the main party area, followed by a voice I didn't recognize calling, "Excuse me? Is Derek Henderson here?" Derek and Monica both turned toward the sound, their body language immediately shifting from relaxed confidence to alert tension. Through the crowd of party guests, I could see a woman in casual clothes approaching our secluded corner of the yard. "Derek Henderson?" the woman called again, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being answered immediately. "That's me," Derek replied, his voice carefully controlled. "Can I help you?" Agent Sarah Martinez approached our group, with the easy confidence of someone attending a casual neighborhood celebration. Her cover as another parent was perfect. She carried a graduation gift and wore the kind of slightly dressy casual outfit appropriate for a high school celebration. "I'm Agent Martinez, FBI Financial Crimes Unit," she announced, her voice carrying across the yard with unmistakable authority. "Derek Henderson and Monica Chen, you're both under arrest for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit theft." The words hit Derek and Monica like incoming artillery. Derek's face went white, while Monica took an involuntary step backward, her phone dropping from suddenly nerveless fingers. "There must be some mistake," Derek said, his voice barely controlled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No mistake," Agent Martinez replied, signaling to other agents who were already moving through the party guests with practiced efficiency. "We have warrants for your arrest and seizure orders for all assets connected to your criminal enterprise." Monica turned and ran. Her flight lasted exactly 37 seconds before she was tackled by Agent Rodriguez near our back fence, her escape route blocked by federal agents who had anticipated every possible avenue of retreat. Derek, perhaps recognizing the futility of flight, remained frozen in place as Agent Martinez approached with handcuffs and a list of charges that would ensure he spent the next 20 years in federal prison. "Derek Henderson, you have the right to remain silent." Agent Martinez began, her voice carrying across our backyard where Emma's graduation party had transformed into a federal crime scene. I looked around at our guests, neighbors, teachers, family, friends, all watching in shock as the man they'd known as a successful real estate entrepreneur was arrested for operating a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme targeting military families. Emma stood near the gift table, her face pale, with confusion and dawning horror as she realized that her father was being arrested at her own graduation party. "Mom?" she called out, her voice small and frightened. "What's happening?" I walked toward my daughter, leaving Derek to face the consequences of his criminal conspiracy, while federal agents secured evidence that would ensure justice for all his victims. The broken veteran Derek thought he was abandoning, had just orchestrated the complete destruction of his criminal empire, using the very celebration he'd planned to use as cover for his escape. Emma needed her mother now, and for the first time in months, I was completely free to be the parent she deserved. The chaos that followed Derek and Monica's arrests unfolded, with the precision of a military operation that had been months in the planning. Within minutes, our backyard transformed from a graduation celebration into a coordinated federal crime scene, with agents systematically documenting evidence while maintaining security and minimizing trauma for the civilian witnesses caught in the operation. Emma stood frozen near the gift table, her face cycling through confusion, shock, and dawning comprehension as she watched her father being handcuffed while federal agents read him his rights. The other party guests had backed away, creating a wide circle around the arrest scene, their expressions ranging from stunned disbelief to uncomfortable fascination. "Mom, I don't understand," Emma said as I reached her, her voice barely audible, over the controlled chaos surrounding us. "Why are they arresting Dad? What did he do?" I put my arms around my daughter, feeling her trembling as she processed the destruction of everything she'd believed about her family. "Emma, your father has been stealing money from military families, including ours. The FBI has been investigating him for weeks." "That's impossible," she whispered. "Dad wouldn't. He's not a criminal." Agent Martinez approached us with the kind of gentle professionalism that suggested extensive experience dealing with family members of arrested suspects. "Emma, I'm Agent Martinez. I know this is overwhelming, but I want you to know that none of this is your fault, and you're not in any trouble." "How long have you known?" Emma asked me, her voice stronger now but carrying an edge of betrayal. "How long have you been planning this?" The question hit harder than Derek's announcement at graduation. My daughter was wondering if I'd been deceiving her the same way her father had been deceiving our entire family. "I found out yesterday at your graduation," I said honestly. "I overheard Dad and Monica discussing their plans to steal our money and disappear. Everything that's happened since then has been about stopping them and protecting you." Emma looked around at the federal agents photographing our house, documenting Derek's business papers, and coordinating with prosecutors who were already building the case that would send her father to prison for decades. "Is he going to jail?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I replied, deciding that Emma deserved honesty rather than false comfort. "Your father stole millions of dollars from military families. He's going to federal prison for a very long time." As we spoke, Derek was being led through our house toward the front door, his hands cuffed behind his back and his face showing the first signs of genuine fear rather than calculated confidence. When he saw Emma watching him, he tried to speak. "Emma, sweetheart, this is all a misunderstanding. The lawyers will fix everything. I love you." Agent Martinez stepped between Derek and Emma before he could continue his manipulation. "Mr. Henderson, you'll have opportunities to communicate with your daughter through proper channels after you've been processed. Monica was already in federal custody, her escape attempt having ended with additional charges for fleeing arrest and assaulting federal officers. The confident real estate professional who'd charmed our social circle for months was now facing 25 years in federal prison. Rachel Chen appeared beside me with a tablet displaying financial recovery projections that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. Colonel Mitchell, the international asset recovery is proceeding faster than expected. The Cayman Islands authorities froze their offshore accounts before any final transfers could occur. We're looking at complete recovery of stolen funds for all identified victims. All victims? 12 military families, plus evidence suggesting at least 6 more cases we're still investigating. Total recovery estimate is $2.8 million. I looked around at Emma's graduation party, now transformed into the scene of the largest military-targeted financial fraud bust in Massachusetts history. Our neighbors and family friends were being interviewed by federal agents, providing witness statements that would strengthen the prosecution's case against Derek and Monica's criminal network. Mrs. Henderson, whose daughter had also graduated, with Emma, approached us with obvious concern. "Sarah, is there anything we can do? This must be devastating for both of you." "We'll be okay," I replied, surprised to discover that I genuinely meant it. "Actually, we'll be better than okay. For the first time in months, I know exactly what we're dealing with." Emma was still processing the scope of her father's crimes, but her natural intelligence was already working through the implications of what she'd learned. "Mom, when you said Dad was planning to disappear, did that mean he was going to abandon me too?" The question revealed the depth of Derek's betrayal more clearly than any financial crime could illustrate. He hadn't just been stealing money. He'd been planning to abandon his daughter at the moment when she was transitioning to college and needed family stability most. "Yes," I said simply. "Dad and Monica were planning to move to Arizona and, eventually, to a country without extradition treaties. They were going to disappear completely." Emma's expression hardened with an anger that reminded me of my own reaction to discovering Derek's betrayal. "He was going to let me think he was dead? Or that he'd abandoned us," I replied. "Either way, you would have spent years wondering what you'd done wrong to drive your father away." Agent Martinez had finished coordinating Derek's transport to federal detention and returned to brief us on the immediate next steps. "Emma, your father will be held without bail pending trial. The evidence against him is overwhelming, so there's a strong possibility he'll accept a plea agreement rather than go to trial." "What does that mean for Emma?" I asked. "It means this process will move relatively quickly rather than dragging out for years. The prosecutors want to minimize trauma for family members of the defendants, especially when those family members are also victims of the crimes." As the federal agents completed their evidence collection and began departing, our house felt different than it had that morning. The deception that had poisoned our family for months was finally exposed, but more importantly, Emma and I were free to begin rebuilding our relationship without Derek's manipulation poisoning every interaction. Emma's friends had been asked to leave during the arrest operations, but several teachers and neighbors remained, offering support and assistance with practical details like cleanup and coordination with MIT about Emma's upcoming departure for college. "Mrs. Mitchell," Professor Williams said, "I want you to know that Emma's scholarship is completely secure. MIT has dealt with family crises before, and there are support systems in place to help students transition to college during difficult circumstances." Emma looked up at me with an expression that combined gratitude, determination, and growing strength. "Mom, I still want to go to MIT on schedule. I don't want Dad's crimes to delay my education." "Are you sure? We could defer for a semester if you need time to process everything." "No," Emma said firmly. "Dad tried to steal my college fund and destroy our family. I'm not going to let his crimes take away my future, too." Looking at my daughter's resolve, I realized that Derek's greatest failure wasn't financial or even criminal. He'd underestimated both the women in his family, assuming we would be too broken by his betrayal to fight back effectively. Instead, his crimes had revealed strengths we didn't know we possessed and brought us closer together than we'd been since my return from military service. The broken veteran and abandoned daughter he'd planned to leave behind were about to become his. most powerful opponents in ensuring that justice was served for all his victims. The confrontation I'd been anticipating came 3 days later, in the Federal Detention Center's visiting room where Derek sat in orange prison clothing, looking like a man who'd finally understood the scope of his miscalculation. Gone was the confident real estate entrepreneur who'd announced his departure at Emma's graduation. In his place sat someone who'd apparently spent 72 hours in federal custody, coming to terms with the reality that his perfect crime had become his complete destruction. "Sarah," he said as I sat across from him at the metal table, his voice carrying none of the casual dismissiveness I'd heard at the graduation reception. "I need you to understand that this has all been blown completely out of proportion." Even facing decades in federal prison, Derek was still trying to manipulate the narrative, still believing he could convince me that systematic theft and fraud were somehow reasonable responses to marital dissatisfaction. "Derek, I've seen the evidence," I replied calmly. "Bank records, email communications, witness statements from your other victims. There's nothing disproportionate about charging you with the crimes you actually committed." His expression shifted, from attempted charm to something approaching genuine desperation. "Other victims? Sarah, whatever the FBI told you about other families, that's not what this was about. Monica and I made some poor financial decisions, but we weren't running some kind of criminal enterprise." The lies came so naturally that I wondered if Derek actually believed them, or if his denial was simply a psychological defense mechanism against accepting the magnitude of his crimes. "Derek, I know about Eleanor Voss, James Morrison, Sarah Chen, and 9 other military families you defrauded. I've seen documentation of $2.8 million in stolen funds. This wasn't poor financial decision-making. This was systematic predatory crime targeting people who'd served their country." For the first time since I'd known him, Derek looked genuinely shocked. "How could you possibly know about—" He stopped, himself, apparently realizing that finishing the sentence would constitute admission of guilt regarding crimes he'd been denying moments earlier. "How could I know about your other victims?" I finished for him. "Because investigating financial crimes was my military specialty, Derek. For 10 years, I tracked money laundering operations and fraud schemes across 3 continents. Did you really think I wouldn't be able to unravel a domestic criminal conspiracy?" Derek's face went white as the implications settled. "Your intelligence? You never told me you were intelligence. You never asked about my specific military assignments. You were too busy calculating how to steal my retirement benefits to care about what I'd actually done during 20 years of service." The revelation was clearly devastating Derek's remaining confidence. He'd based his entire operation on the assumption that his target was financially naive and emotionally dependent. Learning that he'd been stealing from a trained financial crimes investigator was apparently more shocking than being arrested by federal agents. "Sarah, if you understood financial investigations, then you know that intent matters in these cases. Monica and I never intended to permanently deprive anyone of their money. We were planning to pay everything back once our real estate investments matured." The desperation in his voice was almost pitiable, but I'd seen too much evidence of his victims' suffering to feel sympathy for Derek's current predicament. "Derek, intent is exactly what the prosecutors can prove. I recorded your conversations at Emma's party where you discussed moving money to non-extradition countries and establishing new identities. You weren't planning to pay anyone back. You were planning to disappear permanently." Derek slumped in his chair, apparently finally understanding that his legal situation was hopeless. "The recordings? You were wearing a wire at our daughter's graduation party?" "I was gathering evidence of ongoing crimes. Your decision to execute your final asset transfers during Emma's celebration provided perfect documentation of premeditated fraud." "Jesus, Sarah, you set us up. You used Emma's party as bait to trap us." The accusation carried a tone of moral outrage that would have been amusing if it weren't so psychologically revealing. Derek seemed genuinely offended that I'd used deception against him, apparently considering his own systematic lies and theft to be somehow more ethical than my investigative methods. I protected Emma and recovered stolen money for 12 military families. You used our daughter's celebration as cover for criminal escape. There's no moral equivalency here, Derek." He was quiet for several minutes, apparently processing the destruction of whatever narrative he'd constructed to justify his crimes. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different tone, less manipulative, more genuinely confused. "How long have you known? About Monica and me? About the money? About everything?" I suspected something was wrong for months, but I didn't have proof until I overheard your conversation at graduation. Your operational security was terrible, Derek. You discussed sensitive criminal matters in public spaces, left incriminating evidence on unsecured computers, and trusted people who were likely to cooperate with federal investigators. But you seemed so broken. After you left the Army, you were struggling with everything. The civilian transition, managing the trust fund, understanding business operations. You thought grief and transition difficulties meant I was intellectually incapable of recognizing financial fraud? I interrupted. Derek, struggling with emotional adjustment doesn't eliminate 20 years of professional training. The look on Derek's face suggested he was finally understanding the scope of his miscalculation. He'd confused temporary emotional vulnerability with permanent intellectual limitation, assuming that someone dealing with grief and career transition couldn't also be conducting sophisticated criminal investigation. "The other families," he said quietly. "How many of them were like you? How many of them had skills you didn't know about?" Most of them were exactly who they appeared to be: recent widows, struggling veterans, families dealing with medical or financial crises. You targeted vulnerable people, Derek. That's what makes your crimes so despicable. Derek was quiet again, apparently contemplating the full implications of his situation. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "What happens to Emma? How does she deal with having a father in federal prison?" For the first time during our conversation, Derek sounded like he was asking about someone other than himself. "Emma's stronger than you gave her credit for. She's also disgusted by what you did to military families. Your crimes haven't just destroyed our marriage. They've destroyed your relationship with your daughter. Can I write to her? Can I explain?" "Derek, there's nothing to explain. Emma understands exactly what you did and why you did it. She's choosing to focus on her future rather than your failures." I stood to leave, having accomplished what I'd come to do. Derek needed to understand that his victims weren't going to provide him with emotional support or forgiveness that might ease his psychological burden. "Sarah, wait," he called as I reached the door. "Whatever else happened between us, I did love you. I loved Emma. The marriage wasn't all fake." I turned back to look at the man I'd shared 15 years of my life with, the father of my brilliant daughter, the person who'd systematically planned to destroy everything we'd built together. "Derek, love doesn't steal college funds from children. Love doesn't target grieving families for financial exploitation. Love doesn't plan to abandon a daughter at the moment she needs stability most. I know I made mistakes, but—" "You didn't make mistakes," I interrupted. "You made choices, criminal choices that hurt innocent people. The consequences you're facing aren't disproportionate. They're exactly what you earned." As I left the detention center, I realized that Derek would probably spend years in federal prison, trying to construct narratives that minimized his responsibility and maximized his victimization. But his psychological comfort was no longer my concern. Emma and I had a future to build, and Derek's criminal legacy would not define our lives. 3 months later, I stood in the federal courthouse in Boston, watching as Judge Catherine Williams delivered the sentences that would define the next 2 decades of Derek and Monica's lives. The courtroom was packed with victims, federal agents, and family members who'd been affected by their criminal enterprise, creating an atmosphere of gravity that matched the scope of justice being delivered. Derek received 22 years in federal prison for wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. The judge had been particularly harsh about his targeting of military families, noting that his crimes represented a profound betrayal of trust against people who'd already sacrificed for their country. Monica received 18 years for her role in the conspiracy, with additional charges for identity theft and her attempted flight during arrest. Her cooperation with prosecutors had earned her a slightly reduced sentence, but Judge Williams made clear that her systematic targeting of grieving families warranted severe punishment. The corrupt attorney who'd helped them establish shell companies and file fraudulent legal documents received 12 years. The money laundering banker in the Cayman Islands was facing extradition and additional charges in international court. Their accountant had received 5 years in exchange for his testimony against the primary conspirators. But the most satisfying element of the sentencing wasn't the prison terms. It was the complete financial recovery that had been achieved for all victims. Every stolen dollar had been recovered with interest and damages, funded by the seizure of Derek and Monica's assets and the dismantling of their criminal network. Eleanor Voss, the Springfield widow whose husband had died in a training accident, had recovered her entire $340,000 retirement fund plus an additional $85,000 in damages. She'd used part of the recovery to establish a scholarship fund for children of fallen service members. Captain James Morrison had recovered his disability settlement and used the funds to start a nonprofit organization helping veterans navigate financial planning during civilian transition. Lieutenant Sarah Chen had recovered her house down payment and college fund, enabling her to buy the home she'd thought was lost forever. 12 families had been made whole, their financial security restored, and their faith in justice strengthened. By seeing consequences delivered to the criminals who'd targeted them during their most vulnerable moments, Emma had insisted on attending the sentencing hearing. Despite my concerns about the emotional impact of watching her father receive a prison term that would extend beyond her college graduation, her early career, and potentially her wedding and early motherhood, "I need to see this through," she'd told me. "These families deserve to know that someone from our family witnessed justice being served." Now, watching her father led away in shackles to begin serving his federal sentence, Emma showed the same composed strength she'd demonstrated throughout the 3 months since his arrest. She'd testified for the prosecution, providing evidence about Derek's deception and manipulation that had helped establish the pattern of lies he'd used against all his victims. Her testimony had been devastating to Derek's defense strategy, which had attempted to portray him as a struggling businessman who'd made poor financial decisions rather than a calculated predator who'd targeted vulnerable families for systematic exploitation. "Your Honor," Emma had said during her victim impact statement, "my father didn't just steal money from these families. He stole their trust in other people, their sense of security, and their faith that serving their country meant something to their fellow citizens. His crimes weren't financial mistakes. They were attacks on the military community that had welcomed him as family." Derek had sat through Emma's testimony with tears streaming down his face, apparently finally understanding that his crimes had cost him not just his freedom, but his relationship with his daughter. Emma had looked directly at him during her statement, ensuring he understood that she held him fully responsible for destroying their family. After the sentencing, Emma and I joined the other victims and their families at a reception hosted by the FBI Victim Services Unit. The gathering provided an opportunity to meet the people whose lives Derek and Monica had damaged and to see the strength and resilience they'd demonstrated in recovering from systematic financial abuse. Eleanor Voss approached us with the kind of dignity that reminded me why Derek's crimes had been so particularly despicable. She'd been targeted because her husband's death had left her emotionally vulnerable and financially naive, exactly the kind of victim Derek and Monica had specialized in exploiting. "Emma, I want you to know how much your testimony meant to all of us," Eleanor said. "Having someone from Derek's own family stand up for his victims took tremendous courage." "Mrs. Voss, I'm sorry my father hurt your family," Emma replied. What he did was unforgivable, and I wanted you to know that not everyone with the Henderson name thinks military families deserve to be victimized. The conversation continued with other victims sharing their stories and expressing gratitude for the investigation that had not only recovered their stolen money, but prevented Derek and Monica from targeting additional families. The impact had extended beyond financial recovery. Several victims had used their experience to become advocates for military family financial protection. Rachel Chen, the forensic accountant who'd coordinated the investigation, provided final statistics on the scope of Derek and Monica's criminal enterprise. Over 3 years, they'd stolen $2.8 million from military families across New England, using a sophisticated network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and corrupt professional accomplices. This case has become a model for investigating financial crimes targeting veterans, Rachel told the gathering. The methods we developed to trace their assets and unravel their conspiracy are being shared with federal agencies nationwide. Agent Martinez, who'd coordinated Derek's arrest at Emma's graduation party, had been promoted based on her work dismantling the criminal network. She'd become a specialist in military-targeted financial crimes, working with victim advocacy groups to develop prevention programs. Colonel Mitchell's willingness to participate in the sting operation made this case possible, Agent Martinez announced to the gathered victims. Without her cooperation, Derek and Monica would have successfully escaped with millions of dollars in stolen funds. As the reception ended, Emma and I walked back to our car through downtown Boston, passing the financial district where Derek had once maintained his fraudulent real estate business. The building that had housed his operations was now occupied by a legitimate veteran services organization, creating a symbolically appropriate transformation. "Mom, do you think Dad will ever understand what he really did to these families?" Emma asked as we drove home. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "Some people are capable of genuine remorse and personal growth, even in prison. Others spend their entire sentences constructing narratives that minimize their responsibility." "Which kind of person do you think he is?" I considered the question carefully, thinking about Derek's continued attempts to justify his crimes and manipulate sympathetic responses even after his conviction. "I think your father is someone who'll spend 22 years trying to convince himself and others that he was a victim of circumstances rather than a predator who chose to target vulnerable families," I said finally. "But Emma, his psychological comfort isn't our responsibility anymore." Emma nodded, apparently having reached similar conclusions about her father's character. "I've been thinking about changing my last name back to Mitchell when I turn 18. The decision didn't surprise me, but I wanted to ensure Emma was making it for the right reasons." "Are you sure? That's a big step." "Mom, I don't want to spend the next 4 years at MIT introducing myself with the same last name as someone who stole college funds from military families. I want people to know I'm your daughter, not his." Looking at Emma's determined expression, I realized that Derek's crimes had achieved the opposite of what he'd intended. Instead of destroying our family's financial security and breaking our emotional bonds, his betrayal had strengthened our relationship and clarified our values in ways that might never have happened otherwise. The broken veteran he'd planned to abandon had become stronger than she'd ever been during military service, and the daughter he'd planned to deceive had become a powerful advocate for justice and integrity. Derek's criminal legacy would follow him for the rest of his life, but it would not define ours. 2 years later, I stood on the campus of MIT during Emma's sophomore year, watching her present her research on cybersecurity applications for military financial systems at the annual Undergraduate Research Symposium. The irony wasn't lost on me. My daughter was developing technologies to protect military families from exactly the kind of financial crimes her father had committed. Emma had not only thrived at MIT despite the traumatic circumstances surrounding her high school graduation, she'd channeled her experience into academic focus that impressed her professors and attracted attention from defense contractors seeking innovative approaches to financial security. Her research proposal for developing blockchain-based protection systems for military benefit payments had earned her a coveted internship with the Department of Defense's Cybersecurity Division. "Mom, I want you to meet Professor Martinez," Emma said, approaching with a distinguished woman in her 50s who'd been observing the research presentations. "She's the head of the cybersecurity program, and she's been mentoring my research on military financial protection systems." Professor Martinez shook my hand with obvious respect. "Colonel Mitchell, Emma's work is remarkable, but more importantly, her motivation is genuine. She's told me about your family's experience with financial crime, and she's determined to prevent other military families from facing similar victimization." As we spoke, I realized that Derek's criminal legacy had been transformed into something positive through Emma's determination to protect others. The daughter he'd planned to abandon was becoming a guardian for the military community he'd betrayed. The Henderson Foundation for Military Financial Security had grown beyond anything I'd initially envisioned when I'd established it, using funds recovered from Derek's criminal enterprise. What had started as a simple victim advocacy organization had become a nationally recognized resource for military families dealing with financial fraud, with offices in 12 states and partnerships with federal agencies. Eleanor Voss had become our executive director, her experience as a victim providing credibility and insight that no amount of professional training could match. The other families Derek had victimized had become advocates, speakers, and advisors, creating a network of support that prevented isolation and provided practical assistance for new victims. "We've helped over 200 families in the past 18 months," Eleanor reported during our quarterly board meeting the week before Emma's research presentation. "But more importantly, we've prevented an estimated 50 fraud schemes from succeeding by providing early warning systems and financial education programs." The Foundation's work had attracted attention from federal lawmakers, leading to new legislation that enhanced penalties for financial crimes targeting military families and created additional oversight for financial advisors working with veteran populations. The Derek Henderson Act, as it had been ironically named by congressional sponsors, ensured that future criminals would face enhanced sentences for exploiting military service members and their families. Derek himself had become a case study in federal prison programs designed to understand the psychology of financial predators. His cooperation with researchers studying criminal motivation had earned him minimal sentence reductions, but more importantly, his insights were being used to develop prevention strategies that protected potential victims. Monica had attempted to contact me twice from federal prison, apparently seeking some form of forgiveness or understanding that might ease her psychological burden. I'd declined both communications, maintaining the boundary that had been necessary for my own healing and Emma's emotional stability. Some victims find it helpful to engage with their offenders through restorative justice programs. The victim services coordinator had explained when Monica's first contact request arrived. "But there's no obligation to participate if you don't find it beneficial." I'd chosen to focus on forward progress rather than backward reconciliation, using my energy to build something positive rather than process Derek's need for psychological comfort. My personal life had stabilized in ways I hadn't expected. The confidence I'd gained through successfully investigating and prosecuting Derek's criminal enterprise had translated into professional success as a defense contractor specializing in financial crime prevention. My military experience combined with my practical knowledge of domestic fraud schemes had made me highly sought after by government agencies and private companies seeking to protect themselves from similar threats. 6 months earlier, I'd begun dating Michael Santos, a federal prosecutor who'd worked on Derek's case. Our relationship had developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than the emotional vulnerability that had characterized my marriage to Derek. I've never met anyone who turned personal trauma into such effective professional advocacy, Michael had told me during one of our early conversations. "Most people spend years recovering from what Derek did to your family. You turned it into a mission." Emma approved of Michael, appreciating his integrity and his genuine interest in her academic achievements. More importantly, she'd made it clear that she didn't need or want a replacement father figure. She was content with having a mother who'd proven capable of protecting their family and building a meaningful life after betrayal. "Mom, I've been thinking about law school after I finish my engineering degree," Emma told me during our MIT campus visit. "Professor Martinez thinks cybersecurity law might be a growing field, especially for someone with technical background and personal experience with financial crime." The possibility excited me more than I'd expected. Emma's combination of technical expertise and personal motivation could make her a powerful advocate for victims of increasingly sophisticated, cyber-enabled financial crimes. As we walked across MIT's campus, discussing Emma's future plans and the Foundation's expanding work, I reflected on the journey that had brought us from Derek's devastating betrayal to our current strength and purpose. The broken veteran Derek had planned to abandon had become a nationally recognized expert in financial crime prevention. The daughter he'd intended to deceive had become a rising star in cybersecurity research focused on protecting military families. The marriage he'd destroyed had been replaced by relationships built on honesty, respect, and shared commitment to justice. Derek's 22-year prison sentence would end when Emma was in her late 30s, probably married with children of her own. By then, the Henderson Foundation would have helped thousands of military families, and Emma's research would have contributed to protection systems that made Derek's type of crime significantly more difficult to execute. His criminal legacy would be overshadowed by the positive impact created by the people he'd tried to destroy. Standing on MIT's campus, watching Emma discuss her research with professors who recognized her potential to make meaningful contributions to military family protection, I realized that justice wasn't just about punishment for wrongdoing. True justice was about transformation, taking the energy created by criminal victimization and channeling it into prevention, protection, and positive change. Derek had thought he was stealing from a vulnerable widow and her naive daughter. Instead, he'd created two of the most effective advocates for military family financial security in the country. The hunter had indeed become the hunted, but more importantly, the victims had become protectors, ensuring that Derek's type of predatory behavior would face increasingly sophisticated resistance from people who understood both the methods criminals used and the strength that could emerge from surviving their attacks. If you found this story compelling and want to hear more cases of people who thought they could destroy military families but faced complete justice, instead, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Tomorrow, I'm sharing the incredible story of a defense contractor who thought he could defraud veteran disability payments until he discovered his target was a former military intelligence officer who specialized in exactly his type of crime. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happened when this con artist realized he'd picked the wrong veteran to mess with. Subscribe now, and I'll see you in the next story where justice isn't just served, it's delivered with military precision.